other side of the river. It looked this way, and people really didn't like this sort of aesthetics in a quarter. That's a recent photograph, but the freeway ends now like this. It was built up on the surface of the river, but it was stopped because of the intervention of the grassroots movement. And maybe someday also this part of the freeway will be torn down. I don't know. In the 1970s, it also became evident that it will never be possible to build streets large enough to absorb all cars. There will be daily congestion, noise, and air pollution. And as I mentioned, we have a sort of a peculiar form of democracy. We don't just elect a parliament and the parliament elects a government. In Switzerland, it's also possible to vote on issues like, do you want to have a freeway or not? Do you want to spend this much money on public transportation or not? And this here was a poster from a referendum on whether this freeway should be built or not. And here you see above a picture of Zurich as it is and as it was, and below a picture from Boston, where the river has been largely built on also by motorways. In the 1970s, a metro, a subway was planned to get rid of the plans of the tramways on the surface and use the width of the streets for the cars. The vote was against it. In order to let the city government know that the people is not against rail transport, a popular initiative for a referendum was launched to spend 300 million francs, that's about dollars today, for the trams, and this initiative was accepted. That was very remarkable because it allowed the tram planners to install a rather costly system of preference for the public transportation over the private transport. And for many years, Zurich was technologically quite advanced in these fields, especially in the 70s and 80s. Even today, of course, the Zurich trams are quite well known. Here you see a Japanese film team filming the Zurich trams, and that was a photo I just took a few days ago. That used to be a main artery. It's now for strolling, shopping, a street that allows only for trams and for pedestrians. Of course, air quality was an issue. In this case, also, the first attempt to improve air quality, it was against the lead in the fuel, came from the collection of signatures in the street and not from the government. At that time, there were no converters yet. And in 1975, there was an important step for the pedestrians. A national movement for the right of the pedestrians has won a referendum. That was first, the access on foot was denied by new motorways in many places, but nearly at the same time, the value of walking has been discovered. As a result of this national vote, which was against the majority of the political parties, the pedestrians did obtain constitutional rights that still last nowadays. The right to walk is a very popular issue, even though there is no really strong lobby for it. I made part of this lobby, but really we were few and had little money. And hiking trails and the footpaths in the built-up areas have thus become a national issue. This picture shows just the town of Switzerland, and actually each town is supposed to have a plan for the most important walking connections, and this plan is implemented in a certain manner. Can't go too much into details. Also, as I said, a shift in paradigm came about in the late 70s and in the 80s. The idea of freedom before was connected to the car, because with your car you can go from anywhere to anywhere. But at the same time, the car, because it got stuck in all the congestion everywhere, became sort of a prison. And here, this drawing shows that public transport, cycling and walking can be seen as a new type of freedom, the freedom from having to use a car. And this has become a more and more widespread attitude. Public transport becomes very popular in cities. The 1980s were the decade of better protection. First, protection of the environment. The damages of industrialization and motorization have become evident. Urgent measures are taken, but at that time the basic mechanism have remained the same. Many ecological initiatives have failed, but the government has picked up some topics, and in particular in transportation, project has continued. I want to note that there is no car industry in Switzerland, and that has facilitated this kind of paradigm shift. One example of better protection was the installation of these bumps of all kinds, so that speeding could be prevented. That was a measure which became common in many cities and towns. Also, the installation of refuge islands to protect pedestrians has become more frequent. And I think it is a very important thing, because if you have an elderly person who wants to cross a street, it is difficult to cross unless you have in the middle a safe place where you can stop and look to the other side of the traffic coming. And that's the case even in a street that has only one lane in each direction. And here you see the standard that was sort of slowly established. If you have parked cars, the curb has to be prolonged so that only about 3 of these bars are there, and then comes an island, and then comes again a curb, and it's much easier to and safer to cross here than in a street, two-way street. This is the access to this hospital up here. And also we launched the idea to protect the city centers from the avalanche or the rain of cars here with the symbol of an umbrella. And under the umbrella are the public transport, the pedestrians, the bicycles, and the children running. It was called an initiative for the protection of the population from additional car traffic. Protected were also the children. Of course, this is parents were worried about the safety of their children, so reflecting material has become a standard on the way to school for smaller children. And of course, real safety takes more time to install than just having all children wearing this reflecting material. In the late 80s and especially in the 90s, the so-called traffic calming has become very popular in many residential areas. And for the traffic calming, many different forms have been invented and gradually developed into more aesthetic public spaces. The ugly rubber bumps have disappeared, and street spaces have been designed by architects and urban designers. Streets and squares have become attractive places which are nice to stroll and to stay. In the 1990s, many cities and communities have created zones with speed limit 30 kilometers per hour in residential areas. Here is one example. This community has simply planted trees so that the car drivers have to drive in a slalom and couldn't go straight. Here is another example where in the middle of the street, a whole stripe has been established for easier crossing. Here, the pedestrians have the priority. In other places, they wouldn't have the priority, but still it would ease the crossing. And the narrower carriageway has the result that car drivers go slower. And that has become a rather famous case for Switzerland, because here the cars cannot overtake the trams anymore, so they are not even at the tram stops, and the trams are fast, and with additional measures was provided that not too many cars could go to the city center. And this way there is enough space for the pedestrians on the sides. This example shows that former subways that were constructed for the pedestrians to go down under the street and on the other side up have been changed, have been closed down, and now this is pedestrianized because a motorway was built all around this city. And that has been the case in many towns. An important trend was also the improvement of the railway system. In Zurich, it was I show here a poster of the referendum on the S-Bahn, which means that it was an urban train system. And this urban train system has become extremely popular. Very big sums of tax money have been invested, and exceptionally high percentage of yes votes have been deposited in favor of this system, because the car driver have understood that if mass transportation is on rail, then there is enough space for the cars that remain to be flowing instead of in congestion. And now I want to talk about road safety. A number of very bad crashes killing innocent pedestrians have led to a popular movement against innocent driving. The idea was to cut the speed from the top, because in all countries we find irresponsible drivers who drive at speeds that are extremely dangerous. And if someone does that, he sort of accepts that by hazard, pedestrians or cyclists or other drivers are killed. And this movement that collected signature and asked for a referendum was so successful that knew that this type of driving has become a crime in the perception of the public. And very high speed um, is now punished much more severe. And I show this at an example. I mean high speed, I mean somebody who drives at 70 kilometers per hour in a zone that is for 30, or the double in a zone that is for 50. Or here you see somebody who extremely exceeds in speed, or does very dangerous overtaking, or organizes a race on a public road. It has compulsory by law the following consequences, even without a car crash. So that's not just if a crash and with that people occurs, but even if somebody has, there is no crash, this person will always go to jail for at least 1 year. And this person will have the driver's license cancelled, and interesting, the car is handled like the weapon of a criminal. It's confiscated on the spot. And that has had really consequences. Here you see in the garage of the police of a canton, they found these fancy cars. They were confiscated because of reckless driving. And there is an old English tradition to organize races all across Europe, from London to Istanbul or whatever, the so-called cannonball race, and a fine of 10,000. Okay, thank you. Of 10,000 of thousands of dollars. It for them is nothing, and they continued this sport, but they now don't go through Switzerland anymore because the cars are confiscated and they would go to jail, straight to jail. Also in handling alcohol, the limit has been lowered, and a very good campaign has led to an acceptance that there is no driving with alcohol. And here you see an interesting point that is the social question of it was also addressed. This is publicity against drunk driving addressed at young male drivers. She says she won't go by car with a drunk driver. New safety measures are also taken for young drivers because they often have collisions. So now there is a driver's license you obtain only in 2 phases with a phase of probation, and it's easy to lose the driver's license for a young driver. The same is applied for senior drivers who don't want to give up their license. There are now more strict controls after the age of 70. And I want to point out one more thing. These median islands, they have have become quite a success story. And you see here a situation where there is not enough space to build a median island as a cheap measure. Then it has shown, we have learned that even a painted island with vertical elements is better than nothing. And in a second phase, more space will be used, and a refuge island will be constructed. We even have refuge island between 2 direct carriageways in the same direction in this case, because this is a way to go over to a hospital, and also elderly people have